Hello, welcome to tonight's version of Lessons of Vietnam. My name is Bill Dixon, along with my co-host, Mr. Bob Matthews, our educational czar. We have with us tonight a special guest, R.J. Vecchio, who's just came back from Vietnam. He is a Vietnam veteran. He was a combat photographer. He has been on the show showing some of his photography work in the past. But he is also involved with the Vietnamese community here in Raleigh area, and he went to Vietnam with a purpose, and we're going to let him get into that in just a moment. And Bob, you got anything you want to say before we turn it over to Dale? Or
No, I'm just very looking forward to Dale's story because it's very unique and he's very qualified. I'm looking forward to hearing this. Hope our listeners are.
What we're talking about tonight is the former South Vietnamese soldier, the ARVN soldier, who is still in Vietnam today, and how the communists treat them, and so forth. After the fall of Saigon, as we have discussed before with the symposium we just had, most of the ARVNs ended up in what they were called re-education camps, were basically those slave labor camps. They went back in and took all the cemeteries and plowed them under. Basically, when it comes right down to it, the South Vietnamese soldier doesn't exist in Vietnam today.
Exactly right.
The government treats them that way. It's like the shadow soldier. Dale works with an organization here in Raleigh who tries to help some of those soldiers, and I'm going to turn it over to Dale. And Dale, how about telling us basically the organization here that you're involved with? I know that you and your wife both are quite involved with the Vietnamese community here, as we are, but you speak a little bit more Vietnamese than I do, which is none. But give us a background of the group and what y'all trying to do, and then talk about your story and how you were treated in Saigon.
So well, I guess I should start at the beginning. This goes back to meetings of NCVVI back in 2006 or so, that long ago, when some Vietnamese had showed up at some of our ceremonies and made contact with us. And eventually, some of them invited us to talk to them, and I went to their house with a couple other guys, Dale Dutcher, if you remember him, when he was still around, and of course, Bob Patricios. And they said, look, what we're concerned about is the not just all the ARVN veterans left behind in Vietnam, which of course is probably at the end of the war there had to be on the order of at least 2 million people who had served in or were serving in the armed forces of South Vietnam. We're concerned especially about the ones who are crippled, because they are the poorest of the poor, and they're barely surviving, and it's really tough. And we started to explore the situation there, and that's when I started to learn more about what happened. We all know that in 1975, when Saigon fell, a lot of things happened, and the communists took over, and some people were shot, some people went to re-education, and there were 10 years of heavy communist economics that had everybody starving. And then finally in 85, when Russia stopped supporting them, they started to convert to where they are now, which is they're not really communist economics at all. They're controlled capitalism. But in any case, the details that we didn't know about was that not only did most of the people have to go to re-education camps, where they went from anywhere from a very few lucky people went for 30 days, and other people went for up to 18 years. Well, other people went for the rest of their lives because they died there. They had about a 30% death rate of the 300,000 senior officers that they kept for anywhere from 3 to 18 years. What we didn't know was that they also came in, and anybody who had been an ARVN or who had worked for the South Vietnamese government in any way, shape, manner, or form, school teacher, lawyer, post office clerk, didn't really matter. If you work for the government, you were reclassified as enemies of the people, and official discrimination was leveled against you, your children, your grandchildren. You could not live in certain areas. You couldn't go to certain jobs. It's harder for your kids to go to school. Also, if you had much property, most of it was seized. The people that I knew had their houses seized, their family businesses seized, and were almost cast out on the street. Some people were cast out on the street, actually, and that they had been just surviving ever since. And of course, some of them became boat people, which is explains why people would leave a country that they're born to. I mean, people think that 2.5 million Vietnamese left Vietnam in the boat period years. What they don't understand is how unusual that was. In the previous 2,000 years of Vietnamese history, there's never been an exodus. It's a society where you're born to the land and you're born to where your ancestors are buried, and you never leave. And for them to people get up and leave, especially when there's about a 50% chance of, sorry, a roughly 25% chance of dying on the way out, was just incredible. But anyhow, the adult people left behind, and the crippled guys were left behind, and they wanted to organize a charity for these crippled people. And they came to me. I'm a consultant in business, and I do other things. And they asked me my opinion, and I said, well, if you want to have a charity, you need to have stories. You need to have pictures and histories and qualified recipients. And somebody's got to go to Vietnam and do that, And they all looked at me and said, that's really nice. We're not going back. We were in the camps. We can't go back. And then they gave me this great compliment. They said, Gal, you're just a big, fat, old white man, so you can go back. And they talked me into it, and I went back the first time, back in 2006, and after we organized a charity, and they had an interpreter there for me, and I spent 2 weeks there and met a whole lot of and qualified a whole bunch of veterans in and around Saigon. And we started the charity, which we've been expanding slowly ever since. And I've been back 3 more times since the first time. And the last time was just February, and that's what that was about. And my trip originally back was to get them started. My trip after that was to go give support to some of these vets. It's important that we give them money because they need it to buy rice and medicine. They're really desperately poor and sick and old. But sometimes you have to feed the soul as well as the belly. And for these guys to see a white American veteran come visit them is a big, big thing. It means they aren't forgotten. It means somebody remembers them. It means that they still have some honor. And that's enormously important to them. On one of my very first visit, I remember one of the little guys who typically, a lot of these people are there, most of these crippled guys are amputees, anywhere from one leg missing to 2 legs and an arm missing, 2 legs and blind, whatever, just this whole collection of missing things. And he had just stumped 2 legs, and he reached up and grabbed my hand when I gave him an envelope of money, and he said to the Vietnamese that it was great that I brought money. His family needed it, but it was more important that I came to see him because it meant that somebody still remembered and somebody still cared, and they weren't the disgraced criminals that the communists had told them they were for all these years. So that's what it was about. That's why I kept going back, and that's why I went back again this February after 6 years of not going back because of a sickness I had. So that's why I went back in February.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. And also, when you mentioned a while ago the economic situation right after the Saigon fell, a lot of people don't know that China made Vietnam pay back most of the money that they loaned them through their rice and so forth. They were having to send a lot of their rice over to China, and the people of Vietnam were almost starving because China enforced the deal had to send the rice back to China. So there wasn't a whole lot of money for the whole Vietnamese government. So even the Vietnamese who were not South Vietnamese had a rough time, but the South Vietnamese soldier now is really hard to, if you go out in public and so forth, it's hard to find them or know who they are. Most people right now, unless you go when you're in Vietnam as a tourist, you see everything is out there really pretty. It's a pretty picture. Everything looks wonderful and so forth. Everybody's happy. Everybody's got a motorbike in addition to the yard. But then there's this silent majority, or not majority, a group out there that you never hear anything about. Some years ago, we were interviewed by the communist propaganda newspaper or TV station, I guess, in Washington, and we asked about the Arvin soldier, and that kind of ended the conversation a little bit because we asked them about how they were treating the South Vietnamese soldier, and that the subject got changed quite quickly. You arrived in Saigon. Now you had You had an interpreter there, or did someone go with you?
Oh, this last trip, somebody went with me.
Okay. You went to Saigon directly from here?
Well, yeah, through a couple of stops. I had to go through Korea,
Yeah.
but yeah, I got to Saigon. And anyway you go from the East Coast of the United States to Vietnam is a long trip because you're literally on the other side of the earth. You know, it's a 12-hour differential.
Sure.
By the
And
way, just in background, yeah, everybody in Vietnam starved from 1975 to 1985, North and South, because well, partially because of sending the rice to China that they got, but also because communist economics don't work, and everybody was starving. So it was a really, really bad time. Then they ended up fighting a small war with China, you know, later on. That was very nasty, and you know, they kind of fell out of bed about that. They also had ended up sending people into Cambodia and doing some fighting there, and they ended up toppling the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia because they were too extreme even for Hanoi, even though they had been founded by Hanoi and supported by Hanoi. So just all kinds of stuff. I mean, the time from 1975 to 1985 was just horrendous for all of Vietnam, and they had the highest neonatal birth rate, the highest death rate of babies in all of Southeast Asia in that period of time, partially because of the bad nutrition.
yeah. All right. So now you've arrived in Saigon. Did you have appointments set up with some of the former soldiers that you had qualified before? What did you do the first couple of days there, and tell us where you ended up and so forth, if you would.
Well, they had arranged because it was Tet, the big holiday season. They had the local guys had who have been very careful to try to make everything okay with the local police, who don't like us very much, but they'll give us a little bit of tolerance. They'd got okay that we could have a couple of Tet parties, except the conditions were not more than 10 people, and Mr. Dell can only be there for half an hour. Now, why my being there for half an hour makes any difference, I have no idea. But that's the requirement the cops had. So and also they wanted me to qualify a new guy, so I went to his house and visited him directly. Um, and he's basically dying at this point, and we decided to include him. I decided to sponsor him for the rest of his life, which is maybe 6 or 8 months. So I went to visit him, met his family and his condition. He's partially amputee. He's also had a stroke, so he's as I said, he's kind of not long from this world. So I went to see him and undertook sponsoring him and promised that they would get the help they needed and committed some money to that. And then in the ensuing days, there were two different parties for veterans that I attended, which were nice. 8 or 10 guys would show up, or they'd be there. Actually, they would assemble before I would get there because my time I can only be there 30 minutes. And so they'd be setting up. They'd be having a special holiday dinner. I would show up and talk to them through the interpreter and hand out little red envelopes, which is with a little bit of money in them, which is part of the Tet custom. And we would talk, and they would just be so happy to see me and have me sit down and eat something with them. And they'd be drinking beer and just having a fantastic time. Because for them, that kind of a party is like Christmas and New Year's and everything just rolled into one. They don't ever get to do anything like that. And to be able to see each other, like all of us old vets, they like to see each other. They're the best company they've got. They're the best people who understand each other and can communicate with each other. So that's really important to them. So there were those parties I went to, visited the church, did some other stuff, sent some money to an orphanage nearby. So that's how I used up the days there. And then I and my interpreter flew up to Da Nang, met a couple of people there, and then after a couple of days there, went to meet a group up in Hue, which is the big northern, what was the north of South Vietnam, basically the center of Vietnam. And I had been there 8 years before and made contacts, and I went to see these people again, and that was really nice. We went and got there and met 9 guys for lunch. The 9 guys had 3 legs between them. That's the kind of shape they were in. I think 3 legs and 11 or 12 arms, and missing a couple of eyes. But they were they were great guys. We talked, and they were organized, and they made some pleas to us that they got their whole group of people there, and they basically said, we're really pleased that you qualified us, but we know all the other vets, and there are guys who are in much worse shape than we are in. We'd like you to qualify them and adapt them. And I said we have to take that under advisement because I can't make the decision by myself, but I dug into the funds that I carried, my own money that I carried there, and supplied a chunk of money for all these 5 guys so they would at least have something to go on for TED. So we had a really nice meeting, and we went back to the hotel, and that night we went out to dinner. And that was a great night. The next morning was not so great.
Well, Dale, let me go back to a minute. You're basically saying that the former South Vietnamese soldier has no welfare, no pension, or anything else like that. How do they have to survive this long?
The only ones who survived really are the ones who had family. Probably from their own admission, at least half of them died. If you didn't have family to take care of you, you ended up dying. So the only ones who survived are the ones who either were young and had family like parents and brothers and sisters, or the ones who were a little older and were married and had wives and their wives' families. So the only guys who survived were the people who had at least somebody to take care of them. Although it just meant that all of them were going to be in deep, deep poverty.
Now, how about their families, their immediate family, their children, grandchildren? Were they shunned by the government too, or were they just right in just like everybody else?
No, they're not exactly like everybody else. They have a little more trouble at school, what they've told me. They have more trouble getting jobs. There's certain jobs they can't get. They From a lot of my conversations, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some of them have only encountered very mild discrimination. Others have been seriously discriminated against. Ones who went to school talked about, getting a real hard time for some of the professors because of the professors know who their parents were. Because the cops tell everybody. You carry kind of an internal passport in Vietnam. And anybody who checks up on you will know exactly your status, and they will know if you're the child of somebody from the former Republic of Vietnam.
So your ID card has somewhere stipulated that you are the child of a former South Vietnamese soldier.
Somewhere in there, that information is available. Yes.
All right. What about grandchildren? Is it getting better?
No, it's the same for 3 generations.
Geez. So the people, their children today are still paying for what their fathers and grandfathers went through.
Yes, and I will say that a percentage of the children have managed to overcome things anyhow. One of the veterans that I sponsored, who since died, he had 2 children who got into some kind of business on their own and managed to do well enough to help buy a house for their parents, and when their father died, to have a nice funeral for him. That is the exception. So it's not that the discrimination is everywhere and bad all the time. It's not that it's impossible to get anywhere as the child of a former RVN, but how can I put it? You've got 2 strikes against you. It's one of those things.
Yeah. When we talked to a young man, and we had met on one of our trips back, and he came back to see us this past time we were over there, and talking with him, if you're not a member of the Communist Party, there's a certain strike against you, and there are certain jobs you can't get anyway.
Oh, if you want to really succeed in any big business, any related service, any government-related thing, you or somebody in your family needs to be a member of the Communist Party.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you went through and yourself went through some physical situations back here. From I understand from talking with you earlier that the Vietnamese government knew all about your medical problems, and they had a little conversation with you. Can you feel like going into that?
the morning after that nice lunch with the veterans in Hue, at 7 a.m., my interpreter was awakened by basically a summons from the local police that he and I were to show up at the police station at 8 a.m. And it's basically a warrant, saying, you got to come in or we'll have to come and get you. And so we immediately, he immediately made calls and found out that as soon as we had left that luncheon, the police had come in and picked up everybody, all these old crippled old men, and taken them to police headquarters and kept them into the night and threatened them and harassed them and questioned them and just, were very miserable. Told them they could never meet me again, that they should never meet each other again, that, that they were traitors to the nation and that they were being watched. Basically real Gestapo tactics, on these crippled old men. So we knew that was really bad news, and that they'd just been waiting for me to get there. As we left the hotel to walk to the police station, two Vietnamese guys in suits immediately fell in behind us. They've been waiting for us and directed us to the police station up to a meeting room where we sat down, and the interrogation then commenced. And to shorten the story, most of the people in the room were local cops. The guy in charge, to whom everybody just deferred like crazy, apparently is the supreme police authority in that part of the country. And of course, he's a Communist Party member, etc. And speaks English, and went back and forth with my interpreter in Vietnamese, but would talk to me in English every now and then. And finally, at one point, leaned across the table and spoke to me directly in English and told me that he had been waiting for 3 years for me to come into his jurisdiction so he could bust me for breaking Vietnamese law. And that he knew I hadn't been able to come because I'd been sick. So he knew about my being ill back in the United States. When I protested I had broken the laws, he said, absolutely you have, because you registered to come here as a tourist, but you're actually, here giving away money in your charity. I said, well, I'm not here giving away money. I'm visiting people. That's done separately. It didn't matter. And he accused me of a bunch of things. When this guy leaned across the table and told me how happy he was to bust me and to bust these poor old crippled veterans, if you go outside, you can feel sunshine on your face. I could feel the hate on my face coming off this guy. He told me he hated me, hated the charity I worked for, hated the guys that I tried to help. You're a very good communicator. The guy's, right up front, no problem. Knows just what tells you what's on his mind. I certainly couldn't fault him for that. And wants us to, it says that our charity is political, which is not. We're just here to help, crippled old vets who have, what our charity mission is to help crippled veterans of the war who have no other support. Now, if somebody said to me, well, if you met a VC who had no other support, would you support? I said, yeah, we would, but the VC and NVA, they all have pensions. The Army guys don't have any pensions, so they tend to qualify. But in point of fact, in the past, we have given money. I have personally given money to some communist veterans of the war who were crippled. And I've given money to various, 3 different orphanages. None of that made any difference to this guy. And I finally realized that I was not there to actually answer him. I was only there to get, threatened and yelled at. And as far as he was concerned, that by giving money to people that he doesn't approve of, I have broken the law. And I was lucky that they weren't arresting us and throwing us into jail. And that was a kind of an unpleasant hour. Sure. At the end of which they basically said, they wanted me to sign a bunch of stuff, which I refused to sign. I said, it's all in Vietnamese. How could I sign anything in Vietnamese? They didn't like that, but I wouldn't sign it. So we went away, and they came. One of the policemen came to the room later on, and they apparently knew all kinds of things because they knew we had bus tickets to go back to Da Nang, and he basically said, never mind anything else you might have wanted to do today. You're going to get on the bus and go back to Da Nang today. So it's like, oh, well, thank you. I'm glad that, we've always been watched. We then found out that they had gone into our rooms and broken into both of our computers. My translator's computer, he had put the security on it, which they broke through, and they messed up his hard drive so bad he had to have it reformatted. Mine, I didn't have security, so I was able to restore it to functionality, but they had gone in apparently searching for information, et cetera. So it's a great experience, in a police state. And you have to understand, uh, as you said, Bill, and I'll tell anybody, if you want a nice country to visit as a tourist, Vietnam's a great place to visit. The dollar goes a long way. The people are friendly. The food is great. There's beautiful things to see. It's just nice in all kinds of ways, as long as you are a tourist. It's kind of like being a tourist in Germany in 1936. Everything's great. Just don't ask to go see a synagogue or visit that nice camp up in Dachau. That's not going to get you received very well.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's a great place in that sense, but there's all the rest of that society underneath what you see. There's that iron fist in the velvet glove. Every Vietnamese citizen knows that don't cross the government. Don't irritate the government. If you do, your life is going to become difficult very quickly. And if you irritate them enough, your family's life may become difficult very quickly. Suddenly, your family members won't have jobs. So it's a society that's ruled, by a police state where they have whatever controls they want. If they arrest you, it doesn't matter what the charge is because you're guilty of whatever it is. And they're still the Reporters Without Borders rates them as the third worst nation in the world in terms of repressing reporters. There's several other international organizations that rate them very badly, but again, most of us in this country don't see that. We just had one of their high officials at the White House. Everybody's saying how wonderful things are. There was an article in the New York Times just the other day about how everything is great there and American veterans are so well received and they've healed up all the wounds in Vietnam. And I just wrote a letter to the New York Times saying it's nice that VC veterans like to meet American veterans. At least some of them do. That's really nice, okay? But the real healing is not between DC veterans and American veterans. The real healing would be between the northern people and the southern people. Sure. And there ain't no such healing. It's not happening. It's not going to happen either.
It's obvious when you're there, if you spend any time, there's still a big separation today between North and South of Vietnam. South Vietnam is, in a lot of ways, it's wide open for enterprise on the surface. But everybody when I've gone back, it was obviously that they were very careful and reserved in their conversations to how they said whatever they said, and it was definitely nothing that anybody could overhear and be construed as a criticism of the government and the system there. They are free. They're probably got less rules and regulations on the surface to start a business there than it is here. I know the OSHA has not done a whole lot over there because there's evidently nothing like OSHA with some of the work conditions they have and so forth. But there's
neither OSHA nor EPA. And
yeah.
Massive pollution is a terrible problem in Vietnam and in China. One of the difficulties of having a totalitarian government that's corrupt is there's no way to complain about anything. You can't be an environmentalist in China or Vietnam because if you complain about something that's polluting, that's making somebody money, you're the one who'll be in trouble.
Yeah, no sounding board.
Yeah, and corruption is live and well, I believe, today as it was back during the war.
No. My South Vietnamese friends tell me that they have to laugh because corruption in Saigon was by amateurs, and now the professionals have taken over.
Oh, okay.
Now, I have a question about one of your observations. How much factor in the lives there does religion play?
How much what?
How much of a factor in people's lives does religion play?
Well, it's interesting. For much of the southern population, it's still a large part of their life. Not so much in the north. The communists have been suppressing religion in the north for a lot longer. Catholics are basically a discriminated minority, and oddly enough, as a discriminated minority, they hang together tighter than ever. So when you go to mass at a Catholic church in Vietnam, it's standing room only. Because the people show up, they're believers. And they have to be. You've got to be a believer to say you're Catholic over there because it just gets you in trouble. The Cao Dai, had been suppressed as well. I visited a Cao Dai temple, and we were talking about, what shape they were in. And they pointed out that the land that their temple is on today, which was paid for by American expatriate Vietnamese, is on literally 1/8 of the original lot that was owned by the Cao Dai temple in 1975, because the communists came in and basically said, you don't need all this territory. We're just seizing it. And they just seized it. They just took it away and left them this 1/8 section, which they finally built a temple on. They now have trouble because normally part of the keep the religion going is to bring in young men who desire to be basically monks, etc., priests in that religion. And now the government is basically making that more difficult, saying, well, they've got this thing in Vietnam about religion is free. See, we have freedom of religion, but religion is so important that we in the state, we in Hanoi, we have to control how it's done because it's so important. Well, they control it by deciding who is okay to become a monk or a priest or whatever. And they've been denying that to a lot of people, which is one way to choke religion off. The Catholic Church has an avenue because people could study there, and then they would go to Rome. And once they were in Rome, they'd get ordained as priests and come back, and the communists couldn't do anything about it. But they've been suppressing them. Back in January, a church in Saigon run by the Redemptorist Fathers held what was called a coffee day. And they invited, and they got in over 1,200 crippled old ARVN vets to have coffee and snacks and get little envelopes of money. And it was a fantastic deal. And it enraged the communists so badly that they have come down on that church like a whole building. Everybody involved in it was demoted, was told they couldn't work there. They'd have to transfer to other places. They are watched all the time. One of our contacts, one of the Vietnamese we work with, went there to meet one of the priests. When he got home, the police were waiting for him. They have been taking pictures of every single person going in and out of that church during non-mass hours. They identified him and said, "Oh, okay, he's out. He's been visiting this priest." They went to his house, waiting for him, and said, "Don't ever go see this priest again, or you'll be in big trouble." So that's how tight the control is. But the Buddhists, again, some Buddhists are kind of not really obeying the communists. Some are. The communists have insisted on, again, like with the Cao Dai, they want to appoint who the chief monks will be, which is not the way Buddhism is supposed to work, but they've gotten away with it in some places. So it's still a big part of what goes on there, but all the religion is under siege. The Catholics in particular.
Dale, I want to take a break for just a second. As it's getting darker, those of you who are watching, Dale is doing the show by Skype. He is out of town. And Dale, unfortunately, as we are talking, it's getting darker. It's harder to see you. Is there any chance you could flip a light on and get some light on you?
There you go.
Much better. You're back in the picture then. He had gone into become a shadow soldier yourself. So, all right, back to Bob. Had a continued questions.
Dale, you mentioned that you were pleasantly surprised about some of the progress of the students, the younger Vietnamese, getting stronger. And is there still a great desire of the young Vietnamese to leave Vietnam?
Yeah, if they can. Vietnamese has lost a number of its people, some in good ways, some in not so good ways. What's interesting is that I just had an argument from a friend of mine in California. We were talking about the whole current matter of people being upset about illegal immigrants in the United States. And she wanted to point out that they have a bunch, several thousand illegal Vietnamese immigrants in California. Now, none of these are boat people. None of these are the regular refugees. All the illegal immigrants to California now are there because they are the children of rich Vietnamese who were allowed to come to the United States to go to school. And once they spent 4 or 5 years here and graduated from school, guess what? They don't want to go back. So they don't go back.
Right.
So they're the illegal immigrants in California. And what's interesting is that other countries like Mexico will not cooperate with us in getting back their illegals that are here. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to accept them. Okay, it's a big project to get back there. Vietnam is like, oh yeah, we will help you. We will be very glad to help you. Find those students and ship them back to us. We'll take care of it. So it's kind of funny.
At one time, Dale, I know that they didn't like the people who had left Vietnam. They did not like them coming back. But now they have realized that a lot of the Vietnamese boat people and refugees have come here, have made some money, and they like the idea of them going back now and spending money back in Vietnam. So they're a little more open with the regular Vietnamese. What about the former soldier? Are they welcoming them back too, or they're in a totally different category?
If they bring enough money, that's fine. In fact, people forget that Nguyen Cao Ki, who was the vice president, you may remember him. He was the aviator who wore a purple scarf.
Yeah, sit with him. I sat with him at the Bob Hope show.
There you go.
And he actually moved back there he died a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
He moved back there for the last 3 years of his life, went back to the north, and they let him come back. And he didn't say he was happy about it. He just said it was time to put the past in the past. Basically, he went home to die. A lot of the older Vietnamese, they really want to go back to Vietnam to die. The older parents of some of the Vietnamese living right in Raleigh, want to go back to die, and some have gone back there and died. People will retire. I can think of some families I know where the father died. The mother then took the insurance money and sent it to Vietnam and had the relatives there build a house for her, has moved back to Vietnam, and basically has a deal where, you take care of me as I get older, and when I die, the house is yours, because they want to go back to live where they were born. They want to be buried where their parents are buried. So there is that.
Well, I believe, I'm not certain, but I believe if they are here and American citizens, and or whether they are or not, but if they've been working, paying in Social Security, they can go back to Vietnam and still receive their Social Security from here.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Although here's the funny thing, the Vietnamese government has stated very plainly, they do not care in the least what passport you carry. They don't care if you're a naturalized American. If you were born in Vietnam, they consider you Vietnamese, fully subject to Vietnamese law in any way they care to apply it, which means don't go over there and make any trouble and think you can get away with it because you've got an American passport. We will throw you in jail as fast as anybody else. And they have done that to at least 3 or 4 Viet Q, what they call the Vietnamese who left are the Viet Q, which actually is not a complimentary term in Vietnam. Yeah. Some of the Vietnamese, when they left, remember, they were considered traitors when they left. And during the boat week, they were all considered traitors. The same way the Cubans call the people who went to the United States gusanos, worms. They consider them traitors. And when they came back, they originally weren't happy, but they want the money. Now, a lot of the Vietnamese who lived through the bad years have a bad feeling for the people who came to the United States and did well, because they feel like, hey, we lived back here through the bad times and you abandoned us, So they have a little tension with some of the American Vietnamese who go back there. But there is a growing core of Vietnamese, young Vietnamese born in this country, going back to Vietnam, the ones who were raised by their grandparents who speak fluent Vietnamese, going back there and being in businesses there and being accepted there. So there is some of that going back there as well.
Well, I know the young people over in Vietnam on computers. They're dressed like the young people here, and somewhat listen to the same music and so forth as the people here. So a young Vietnamese going back to their home of their ancestors, start business there, should be able to fit in very well with the younger community there.
Yeah, they don't have too much trouble. My first trip back, my interpreter, in 2006, was a young Vietnamese from Canada, and he had been there for 6 months and had fit right in, and then went back to Canada. I saw him a few years ago in Canada. The family still goes back and forth, although he's now working, so he's staying mostly in Canada. But yeah, the younger people, they can fit in.
Yeah, I had a question.
Again, they also know that when they fit in, they can fit in with the culture of the people. They will be careful what they say and do. By the way, privately, people, especially in the South and sometimes even in the North, privately, people will bitch vehemently about the government and the corruption.
Sure.
You just don't do it publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question on property ownership. If people come back to Vietnam, like you said, some of the Vecchio or the Vietnamese coming back, the expats, is there a lot of obstacles to owning property?
Less than there used to be. It used to not be possible for anybody not born, registered, and living in Vietnam to own property there. Of the Americans I know married to Vietnamese women, because I know several Marines who went back married Vietnamese women. They would buy property, but the property would have to be bought by their in-laws.
Right.
They would supply the money, their in-laws would buy it. Recently, they've loosened that up to some extent. I'd have to check on you, but I remember one of the guys writing me saying that, yep, now it would be easier now to buy and own some property. However, they've already had their bust. The guys I knew bought condominiums in Da Nang when everything was on the way up, and they were buying condominiums in Da Nang at $200,000, which, remember, $200,000 in Vietnam is like 500,000, 600, 700. It's enormous money there. And they thought they'd make money. Well, the bubble burst, and now those $200,000 condos are selling for 100 and a quarter.
Yeah.
So I know several people who own property in Da Nang that they can't get rid of without taking a loss.
Yeah, the part of the problem was they were building all these wonderful condos and so forth, but the infrastructure was back like it was during the 60s when we were there. Way behind on the infrastructure as far as roads and utilities and so forth. So that was also had to be a problem with all these new high-rise buildings and so forth. I know that the prices we were quoted were pretty high. There does seem to be a strong influx of a middle class now. It looks like they're building subdivisions just like they are here in places. So, but those places are still very expensive. They got to be government employees mostly, or people from other countries going in there.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that. You got to remember, here's an important thing. When the war ended, the total population of Vietnam was maybe 35 million people. Maybe not quite that high, but not more than 35 million people. It is today 84 million people. They have more than double their population. And what you don't realize is the population pressure. The cities are one thing. Saigon now is literally 6 times the size it ever was. But out in the countryside, where most of us don't spend a lot of time, and in one of my visits, I was all the way out the countryside, and there are villages out there that look exactly the way they looked when we were there.
Yes.
I mean, exactly the way they were there. We're talking about barefoot kids, out in the fields leading a water bowl. They're just, planting rice by hand. So the bulk of the society, or a big chunk of the society, is still out there, agrarian, raising rice and leading a pretty minimal life.
Yeah, the rice farmers out
Although
there.
they all have cell phones.
Yes, and a satellite dish in the front yard now. That's about the only difference. The houses look like the same houses, same shacks that they were there in the 60s when we were there. The only difference is that I've been able to see is maybe one more motorcycle in the front yard and also a satellite dish.
Dale, I have a question.
Well, you were still in a nicer neighborhood. When I was in the really poor neighborhoods where some of these veterans live, trust me, no satellite dish.
No.
No satellite dish. The ones in Hue, I've got a picture of when I was up there, and I'm interviewing this one guy in a wheelchair. His mother is behind him, this wrinkled old lady. She's holding in her hands a metal bowl that's got coals in it because there's no heating in the house, and it gets cold in Hue in February.
Yes.
So yes, there's an upper class. Well, there's an upper class. There's the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. These are the people who are literally millionaires, even by American money, and their kids are driving Mercedes, and the Mercedes that costs 50 grand in the United States costs over 100 in Vietnam. Okay, so there's that 1% of the 1% of the 1%. There's an upper class. There's a middle class, but the middle class is still not a big chunk of the population. Look at the United States. Our middle class is literally about 70% of the people who live in this country, if not more. Vietnam, the middle class is maybe 15, 20% of the population at most.
Well, Dale, I have a question on import, export, and the economy, because you almost see every article of clothing now made in Vietnam. Made in Vietnam. There's so much they're exporting. Are they becoming now a world player in economics?
Well, my second last trip, I was next to a shoe factory, and I looked in, and I could see all these women assembling shoes, and I was talking to my host. They were part of a Chinese factory because it turned out that the labor was cheaper in Vietnam than it was in China. So the Chinese were shipping these shoe components to Vietnam to be assembled. So the labor rate is now lower in Vietnam than it is in China. So that's why you're seeing all the clothing being made there. The people who used to ship the clothing stuff to Bangladesh and India and China are now shipping it to Vietnam.
I got you.
Now, one of the questions I wanted to ask, there's been the Vietnam veterans here, of course, were aging out. I was told by a former South Vietnamese soldier there is no post-traumatic stress in Vietnam. I guess it's their thought process. They don't seem to have road rage either. And if the roads were like it is here, we're constantly uprising of fighting going on all the time. But I know the American soldiers come back with a lot of maladies, diseases, and so forth. Is the Vietnamese soldier over there on both sides, I guess, North and former South Vietnamese soldiers, are they having a lot of health problems due to the war, or was it just something that because it was so much different than what the American soldier was used to anyway?
They don't appear to be having any unusual health problems. And most of the South Vietnamese guys that I've met, they don't have PTSD because they are still alive because they're survivors.
Mm-hmm.
They're the guys who went through all this hell, the re-education, all that stuff. And, you know, you get through that and your focus just becomes on the next breath you're going to take and the next piece of food you're going to put in your mouth. You know, you don't get hung up on stuff in your past because you're living right now. And maybe the part of that is also the Oriental philosophy. I do know that for a while in the North, one of the scandals was that old NDA soldiers would be on the corners in their uniforms begging because their pensions were not enough to really keep them going. And I didn't say pensions, but I know from the Vietnamese, the VC, the retirees that I met, that the pension is really quite minimal. It's not what we call a decent pension at all, but it's better than nothing. And it got to the point where that was noticed, it was embarrassing, and somehow the government found a way to say that you can't be on the corner begging in your uniform, and forced all these old North Vietnamese veterans to stop doing that. I don't know what happened to them, but they're not on the corner begging in uniforms anymore. But I know people who were there and saw them. This is going back a good 15 years ago, and when it was common in Hanoi to see people in old NDA uniforms begging.
Yeah.
From the result of your last trip, it sounds to me like even if you were inclined to go back, it wouldn't be such a good idea.
No, I can't go back anymore. You know, we now know that I will never be lonely in Vietnam. See,
That's true.
because there's always somebody watching me.
Do you think there's some of the people who, of course, have migrated to the United States are probably also sending reports back regularly about people who they are keeping an eye on, that there's people in the Vietnamese community here that might be keeping them informed in just what's going on as far as in what you're doing?
All the Vietcu that I know are very certain that there are still communist agents here, mostly from people who came over later, but even among some of the earlier people, which you'd always wonder why. Why would anybody who came over as a refugee early be involved with the communists? Unless it's because they still have family over there. Because remember, they can hold your family over you.
Yeah.
The Russians were really good at that. They would blackmail people who had left Russia by saying, well, you know, you got your aunt and uncle over there, and they have a nice little farm. It'd really be a shame if they lost it. But they all believe that. And we do know, I mean, some of the Vietnamese activists I know have gotten hate emails. I've gotten hate emails from Vietnam. So we know that there are some people there in Vietnam who are interested in what goes on over here. We certainly know that cop knew that I've been sick, which is kind of interesting.
Sure.
You know, so it's we know they pay a lot of interest. We know that they watch. We are going to be changing our website for charity because we know they're watching our website. So we've got to change that to make it less offensive to them. You know, and make it clear that we're not political. We're not anyhow, but we have to somehow prove we're not political. You know, it's kind of like over there, you're guilty until proven innocent. You know, so got to have to work on that.
Yeah. Well, so basically, when it comes down to it, there's no way a open charity. I hate to use the word the Wounded Warrior Project here, since the money has a tendency to go to where it's not supposed to be going. But there's no way a group could start and funnel money into Vietnam as for the South Vietnamese soldiers. They'd put a stop to it.
Yeah, they would. It has to be done all underground, very carefully. If you went over there, if you played the game that communist cop pushed on me, come on over here and register. Tell us that you want to support crippled veterans, and we will help you. We will just take some money for overhead, and we will find the right veterans for you to support.
The right veteran.
The right veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Who wore pith helmets. And,
probably.
Yes.
Chances are good.
I know that some of the from some of the books I've read, some of the people high up in the Vietnamese Communists, which were actually more than communists. A lot of the VC were actually nationalists, and some of them went up going to re-education camps. And even though they were fighting for the North per se, but even though they were fighting more for nationalism, when the communists took over, they sent them to re-education camps to be re-educated to the communist thought pattern also.
There was some of that, and in fact, there is, in the expat community of Vietnamese in Paris, there are several people who were high up in the National Liberation Front. There were people who were high up in North Vietnam who, at the end, protested that this was not exactly the way things were supposed to go, and found out that in communism there is no tolerance for dissent. Zero, none. The guy who was the Minister of Justice, Tan Lu Trung, who had spent a life working for them, had been out in the jungle for 8 years, working for them, had been tortured in Saigon working for them, ended up as a boat person and lives in Paris. I mean, I've often said, in a sense, the most tragic people of the war were the sincere nationalists who really believed in the cause that they thought they were fighting for, only to be totally betrayed at the end.
Yes, we've talked to some of the former VC on our trips over who basically said the same thing. They joined, and shortly after they joined, they realized they'd made a mistake because they had joined the communists, and the communists had one thing in mind, and of course they had something else in mind. But it was too late for them to do anything about it because they would be dead themselves. Appreciate you coming on the show. I know you're out of town, and I think it's important that we get out the information about the former South Vietnamese soldier. Like I said, there's nothing you can do out front. As you know, we go back and have been working with the orphanages over there. We have not had the opportunity to really work with the former South Vietnamese soldier, which is maybe a reason why the government is welcoming us back over there. And so forth. Now, I was told about 2 weeks ago by a Vietnamese refugee that there was a good chance that communism would fall in Vietnam in the next 10 or 15 years. But it sounds to me like the old communist line has not changed.
Does the phrase "wishful thinking" ring any bells?
No. Yes, I've heard Vietnamese over there say that in private. But there's still that it's almost like two Vietnams. The Vietnam for the tourist, and then there's the real Vietnam for the people.
Yeah, and the truth is that over the years, the great bulk of Vietnamese understand that this government sucks. It's not a government of the people or for the people. Remember, the last thing I'll say, the official name of the country is the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Under pure socialism, you are guaranteed a house, a job, education, and medical coverage. In Vietnam today, which of those four things do you have supplied to you at no cost? The answer is none. We have more socialism in practice in the United States of America than they have in Vietnam. That's the irony of the whole thing. It's just crazy.
Dale, I'd like you to know that we're very proud of you. You're a very courageous man.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Dale is a member of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, and and travels around times and speaking with school groups and so forth. He has a very good slide series, I guess you would call it, for lack of whatever, but digital photos and so forth. Dale was a combat photographer, which means that he got to shoot at and couldn't always shoot back because all he was shooting with was film. And I cannot imagine being called into the police department over there going, maybe I should have gone to the American Embassy first before I come over here. But it was a little too late to worry about it then. And appreciate you coming on. I think the story you just told is important to get out. The show will go into our archives for the kids in school to better understand communism as they go back in and do some research, because I think it's important with the society we have today that we understand just how much freedom we have and how much freedom they don't have. Again, appreciate you taking your time out of town to talk with us, and we'll see you when you get back, unless you've got something else to closing statement.
No, always, guys, always a pleasure to be of help, and keep me in mind if anybody wants a speaker. I'm always glad to go anywhere and contribute if I can.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Dale.
All right, good night.
Enjoy your time out of town.
Okay, buddy. Good night.
Well, that was the show for tonight. Dale was brave enough to come on the air. It's somewhat frightening when you realize that you're living your life here and somebody over in a communist country knows what you're doing from day after day when you go back over there. And I can't imagine being called into the policeman's office and interrogated because you start wondering, will I ever leave here?
That man's very, very courageous, and he certainly is a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
So if you're out there listening to our show tonight, any kind of educator that's building your database of speakers, remember the name R.J. Del Vecchio. He is well worth the time to bring into your classroom.
Yeah, and Dale has the book about the myths of Vietnam. It's a short read. It's a good read. It's not a big, heavy book. It's something you can sit down and keep with as a reference or whatever. But it's a valuable book to get. It talks about the myths, some of the many myths. It doesn't cover all of them. I don't think there's a big enough book ever cover all the myths of Vietnam. But that's a good book to get as your study of Vietnam and so forth. This is ending up our show. We'll be having our show again in 2 weeks. I don't remember exactly the date right off the top of my head as we go. Amnon's looking it up as I'm speaking. But we hope to have another guest, author and blogger, on the show. He'll be doing it also by Skype. We can get that worked out. What's the date of the next show? 22nd of July. Looking forward to seeing you again, or you seeing us. We pretend like we're seeing you. And you have a good week, and God bless America.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.